Alright guys, this is the lecture from Module 12. In this unit we are going to be, or I should say in this module, we are going to be talking about unemployment and how it's measured. We're also going to show you how to calculate the unemployment rate. We're going to summarize the significance of the unemployment rate for the economy and explain the relationship between the unemployment rate and economic growth. Alright, so the unemployment rate, basically there's a few things you need to know in order to be able to accurately analyze the unemployment rate. The first one is just what employment is. Employment is the number of people currently employed in the economy, either full-time or part-time. So basically if you have a job, you're employed. Alright, unemployment is the number of people who are actively looking for work but aren't currently employed. Right, so these are people who, are trying to find jobs. Maybe they're going out on interviews, applying to different positions, but they just don't have a job yet. The labor force is equal to the sum of employment and unemployment. All right, so we have millions of people in the labor force and we have millions of people out of the labor force, and we're going to kind of talk about that here in a second. All right, now, in this graphic, we've got basically what this shows is the unemployment rate. Sorry about that. The periods of time that are shaded are recessions. So if you notice, the unemployment rate is going to increase during a recession and then decrease during a period of expansion, and then increase dramatically during a recession and then decrease, increase, decrease, and it really increased in 1980. That was a bad recession. That was to get us out of stagflation, and then it decreased. Then it increased a little bit in 1991. Then we had a long period of growth, so it decreased a lot. Alright, it went back up a little bit after the early recession in 2001, and then it decreased, and then the recession of 2008 and 9 really caused it to go up a lot. If we were to continue with this graph beyond 2013, we would see the unemployment rate drop. It would be right about there, because we are just under, what happened? We are just under 4% now for our unemployment rate. I know it's not perfect, but that's where we're at. Alright, so the unemployment rate. Alright, continuing on with this. First of all, the labor force participation rate is the percentage of the population age 16 or older that is in the labor force. Alright, and the way that you figure out that number is you simply take the number of people in the labor force divided by the population age 16 and older, and then you multiply that times 100. Alright, currently our labor force participation rate is like around 64%. That's a little lower than it has been historically, but we'll talk about some of the factors that cause that. We have a lot of people that are retiring, a lot of people that are still out of the labor force from the last recession, so there's a lot of factors that influence that. Now, the unemployment rate, alright, this is the big one. That is the percentage of the total number of people in the labor force who are unemployed. Alright, so you're going to take the number of unemployed workers divided by the labor force multiplied by 100. Alright, you got to know those formulas. This showed up on an FRQ in last year's AP exam, so it's very important for you to know that. So the unemployment rate can overstate the true level of unemployment, while people who are easily employed look for the right job. Alright, it is possible for the unemployment rate to not, it's not a perfect measurement, just like everything, so you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Alright, now, the unemployment rate can be understated by not including the following groups of workers. Discouraged workers are non-working people who are capable of working but have given up looking for a job given the state of the job market. So they're just frustrated. I mean, we've all been there, right? You've applied for a few jobs and haven't gotten an interview, so maybe you take a week or two off from applying. All right, you're technically not unemployed because you're not looking for work actively. And there's different, variables that they use to measure it. It's more complicated than that, but that's an example of how the unemployment rate can be understated because those people are not in the labor force at all. We also have marginally attached workers. Basically, those are people who would like to be employed and have looked for a job in the recent past but are not currently looking for work. So maybe they interviewed and applied last month, they're taking this month off. Maybe they'll go back next month and apply for jobs. Underemployment is the number of people who work part-time, so they count as being employed, but they cannot find full-time jobs, and they would prefer to have those full-time jobs. So underemployment is a problem in the economy. It was especially problematic during the recession in 2008, 2009, when you had a lot of people who had previously been working, upper middle class jobs that were forced to take jobs at Target, in grocery stores and other service retail industries, because those were the only places that were hiring and they needed money coming in. So they were underemployed at that point because they had to go find whatever work they could. Now these are alternative measures of unemployment between the years of 1994 and 2013. So the orange line right here is the generic unemployment rate. The next one, the purple one right above it, is if we add in discouraged workers. Now you'll notice that when times are good, there's not as many discouraged workers, but as there's a recession, the number of discouraged workers will kind of separate from everyone else there. All right, and so you'll see that little gap there. Number 3, the yellow-ish line, is if we add other marginally attached workers. So those are people, again, who have applied recently, might apply in the future, but just aren't currently looking for work. And then lastly, as you can see, this was, like I said, this was a really big problem during the recession, plus involuntary part-time. That gap there is much larger than it was even here in the early 2000s. So just kind of interesting to look at those data points. There's also varying unemployment rates based on demographic data. Teenage unemployment overall is the highest, and then if we break that down, African American teenager rate is much higher than white teenager rate. In general, African American unemployment rate is much higher than the overall unemployment rate and white unemployment rate. During every recession in the last 30 years, the unemployment rate has risen. During periods of expansion, the unemployment rate will usually fall, however, not always. Sometimes it takes a minute for it to start coming down, because once businesses start to realize that the economy is doing better, then they start going out and hiring more people, but it takes time to hire people, and it takes time for people to find jobs. So that kind of lag is what causes that to happen. Again, there's that same graph from earlier in there. So this is growth and changes in unemployment rate. So you can kind of see that as real GDP grows, especially by a lot, then the change in unemployment rate drops dramatically. All right, it's kind of interesting regression analysis, scatter plot. And then, so this is also very interesting. So college, this is the unemployment rate between college graduates between the ages of 21 and 23, and college graduates who are 25 and older. Now, you'll notice that it's much higher for people who are between the ages of 21 and 23, and that's probably because of a lack of experience and other things as well. We'll go into more detail on this here in a minute, or not in a minute, here when you all get to class. But it is interesting to take a look at that and to see how, as people get older and more educated, they tend to have much better job prospects. So anyway, so go ahead and take your notes, write down any questions you might have, and I'll see you guys at the next class.